'Cause like a winter tonight, I thought I would always have light. The quick flash that you gave to me, so dark I could barely see. Looking
From wherever you are around the world, welcome and thank you for joining us. Today we're going to be exploring a very interesting topic called organ harvesting, or also known as organ pillaging. With us today is Dr. David Kilgour, former Secretary of State of Asia Pacific and Canada. He was also nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for his work on organ pillaging. Welcome to the circle, Dr. Kilgour.
Good to be here, Carlos.
Now, Dr. Kilgour, this is a topic, how would you say it? It's kind of hard to talk about. I mean, thinking about people harvesting organs.
Yeah.
What got you interested in this work?
It's terribly depressing. And I was asked with another Canadian to do a study on whether or not the allegations were true that it was happening. And as you know, I'm sure it's only happening in one country in the world, which is China. There are organs that are taken in other countries, but people get paid for them, and they only usually take one kidney, and then the person has to survive on one kidney after that. But in China, this other person and I discovered to our horror that in fact they take all the organs, and the so-called donor, who isn't a donor at all, is killed in the process, and his or her body is burned afterwards. And then the organs are given either to wealthy Chinese nationals, or in some cases to organ tourists from places like Los Angeles or Ottawa or around the world, people who are prepared to pay huge amounts of money to have a new liver or a new kidney or a new lung.
So it sounds like there's big money in this.
A human body is worth about $500,000 if they're sold like some grotesque restaurant selling lobsters, or in the industry is probably worth about $1 billion a year to doctors, nurses, the People's Liberation Army, which get involved in flying the organs from wherever they're taken to, usually to Shanghai, where the patient is waiting to get a new organ. So yeah, it's a lot of money, and China, the government of China, the party state in China, is getting so much bad publicity over this, and around the world, people now are saying this has got to stop. I think we're close to the point where they're going to stop it. They haven't stopped it yet, but I think they keep saying they're going to stop it, which is a pretty good sign that the government of China knows they're getting a hideously bad public relations on this matter.
And they're doing about, 10,000 a year or so?
Yeah, and there's something like 600 hospitals in China now authorized to do organ transplants.
Authorized to do them?
Yeah, so whether the 10,000 is accurate is open to question, but it's a huge number. David Mattis and I estimated that it was about 41,500 transplants were done between 2001 and 2005. A new book by Ethan Gutman called The Slaughter estimates it's about 65,000 Falun Gong practitioners, Uyghurs, Tibetans, and House Christians have been killed between 2001 and 2008 for their organs. That's an awful lot of people dead so their organs could be pillaged and trafficked.
Before we continue on, I want to make sure the audience sees it. The one book by Dr. David Kilgour is Organ Harvesting. It's a wonderful book. It is, like he says, a tough subject, but it's a great book to really get an understanding of what's going on out there. You also have The Slaughter, which is another wonderful book, and there Dr. David's got there for you as well.
Yeah.
And Dr. Kilgour, another thing that's interesting to me, I've spoken with others. Greg Autry, I think, was one. Some of the people that are killed for their organs, I heard were coming from prisons. They had life sentences, so they just kind of disappeared.
Well, yeah, that's a very important point you're raising, Carlos. We estimate that there are at least 350 forced labor camps across China, all over the country. Even in the capital, there's a women's forced labor camp in Beijing, but these camps are all over the country. People work in these camps about 16 hours a day, no pay, of course, terrible conditions, and about half the people in these camps are Falun Gong practitioners. And because we've talked to people who've managed to get out of these camps, and they've told us this, that the only people that get tested every 3 months or so in the camps are Falun Gong practitioners. Doctors come in and they give eye examinations and organ examinations, and they wonder, well, why are you torturing us, and yet you're testing us medically? Well, we know the answer is because that if the computer bank says that you or I fit the tissue type or blood type for customer X here who's arrived from, let's say, Los Angeles, you were taken into the operating room and were killed, and our organs are flown to Shanghai for this person to have a new organ. The other thing I should tell you is that there's no trial for most of these people. A police signature sends you to one of these camps for up to 3 years. And the other thing, people should know is that we've been told that they make everything from Christmas decorations to McDonald's toys to all manner of course, garments in these camps, and these camps are sold in the West. So the U.S. has a contract or a treaty with China saying there'll be no forced labor products sold between the two countries, but nobody bothers to enforce it. So things are done as subcontractors, and then these things end up and as Christmas decorations, for example, and they've been made by forced labor in a forced labor camp. It's quite hideous.
That is terrible.
Yeah, it is terrible.
We're going to move on from the forced labor camps for a second, because you mentioned the Falun Gong, I think it was, and then you mentioned another group, the Uyghurs.
Yep.
What are these groups? Can you give us a little bit of information about them, and why are they targeting these groups?
Well, ever so shortly, the main group is clearly Falun Gong, and that's the only group that David Mavis and I investigated the evidence that it was happening to that community. And we found something like 52 kinds of evidence. And if anybody wants to read our report or our book, they'll see the case is absolutely overwhelming that it's happening. They're there because in 1992, there were virtually no Falun Gong practitioners, but they grew so quickly that by 99, there were between 70 and 100 million people practicing Falun Gong. It's a light exercise, and they have principles, truth, compassion, and forbearance they believe in, and they do believe in it. And so they grew so quickly, and their values were so much out of sync with the people running China that the president at the time, Jiang Zemin, declared war on them. And so since April of 1999, this war has been going on, and it continues to go on. And the way it's done is that they're thrown in these work camps, and thousands of them have been killed for their organs. The Uyghurs, of course, are Muslims, and originally they were Turkestan, so they're on the out list too with the party state in China, with the party. And then there's the Tibetans. Of course, everybody knows that Mao and all leaders have been persecuting Tibetans, particularly in recent years. But then there's also the House Christians are being, according to Ethan Gutman's book, they're being killed for their organs too. But our study only relates to Falun Gong.
Now, on the Falun Gong, how many do you think there are?
Well, in 99, when this war was declared, there were between 70 and 100 million of them.
70 to 100 million of them?
Million, yes. We've talked to practitioners in probably 50 countries, and I think they now exist in about 130 countries where they're legal. There's only one country, to my knowledge, on earth where it's illegal to be a Falun Gong practitioner, and that's China. So, yeah, it's really quite bizarre. It's sick, is what it is. It's absolutely sick.
And are they violent?
No, they're the most non-violent people imaginable. I've never found a single case of where a Falun Gong practitioner reacted violently to the violence that's imposed on them constantly by the police and the government of China.
Very strange.
Oh, well, what they do, by the way, your viewers might be interested in this. For example, I had a friend who went to Beijing a few years ago, and she was touring Tiananmen Square with her mother, and they had a guide, and somehow Falun Gong was mentioned. And the guide said, "Oh, Falun Gong, they eat their children." So this nonstop propaganda on the government media, which is all the media in China, basically, has been going since '99. And so a lot of people, both in China and outside of China, think that Falun Gong must be terrible. But this is just, in my view, and I'm not a Falun Gong practitioner, this is just propaganda. of the same kind of propaganda that we saw in Rwanda before the genocide there in '94, and the same kind of propaganda we saw in Hitler before the genocide.
That's exactly what I was thinking about, was Hitler and the Jews.
Yeah.
When they used to have the cartoons making them look like rats.
Yeah.
So they're slaughtering, it sounds like they're slaughtering a lot of religious groups, mostly is what they're targeting.
Yeah.
More,
but mostly Falun Gong. The Falun Gong is clearly the major. I mean, Ethan Gutman estimates it's perhaps between 2,000 and 4,000 Uyghurs, Tibetans, and Christians that he's found have been killed for their organs. But as I say, he also figures about 65,000 Falun Gong have been killed for their organs since 2001. And it continues to happen. That's the amazing thing, that it's still going on.
What is China's position on this? Are they denying it?
Well, they deny it. They denied it for a long time, and then their deputy health minister, a guy called Wang Jiafu, admitted that almost all of their organs were coming from prisoners. He has never once admitted that any of the organs are coming from Falun Gong who are convicted of no crime, virtually most of them. And he never lets the word Falun Gong come out of his mouth. It's always prisoners. But he has announced that they were going to stop doing it. But a few months ago, basically, they announced they were not going to stop doing it. And the slaughter continues, as Ethan Gutman says.
Now, when they kill these people, do we know how?
Oh,
Are
yeah.
they just shooting them, or?
No, they're well, some of them are killed. Some of the capital offense prisoners are shot. And we've had evidence, a good deal of evidence on that, is that they shoot them in the right side of their chest so they don't hurt the heart. And then while they're still alive, and we have evidence of a surgeon who did this actually in the Uyghur part of China, took the organs out before the patient had died. Now that's inhuman. Not even the Nazis did that kind of thing. Of course, they didn't know how to do it either. But it's pretty sick stuff.
It really is.
But no, that every so-called donor dies in the process. There are no survivors of this in China, and it's important to people to understand this, that it's not as if they take out one kidney. They take out both kidneys. And I have one case that I can give you quickly, is about a man, I better not say what country he came from, but he went for a kidney. A doctor, Colonel Tan, T-A-N, came in and they have to match tissue type and blood type. He went down a list and he saw a name. He came back 3 hours later with a vial with 2 kidneys in it. They weren't compatible. This Major Tan went back and brought 3 more sets of kidneys to this guy, and they didn't work. So he went back to his country for about 3 months, came back. It happened 4 more times until he got a kidney that worked. 8 people were killed so that he could have a new kidney. And,
wow.
And we've got that in our book, by the way. We mentioned that in the book.
8
It's
people.
just human. Killed so that he could have a new kidney. Isn't that incredible?
Yeah.
How does anyone from the government of China hold their head up or look anybody in the eye at any conference or any street in Los Angeles or Ottawa or anywhere when the regime is doing this kind of stuff?
A complete disregard for humanity.
Well,
I don't even know what to say
human
about
beings-
that.
Yeah, well, human beings have all the values of an ant to them, unless they happen to be, party members or something. Is one way of looking at it.
You're absolutely right.
Gotta
Well,
stop.
Tough topic, and I know in part 2 we're going to talk a little bit more about Asia and Asia Pacific, because I know you were Secretary of State over there. There's a lot going on over there in the Asia Pacific, aside from organ pillaging, that I want to get to. Once again, Dr. David Kilgour, thank you so much for being on The Circle. Organ harvesting is one of his books. Dr. Kilgour, you also have The Slaughter. Before we go, I know a lot of people are going to want to know more information about this and where we can get a hold of them. Where do we go?
Well, I guess one place is my website, which is www.david-kilgour, Kilgour. It's O-U-R is a Scottish spelling, .com.
We won't hold that against you. www.david-kilgour, Kilgour.com. You also have another site you mentioned?
Well, yeah, that's probably the easiest one to go to. There is one, Facebook. I'm on Facebook, but unfortunately I have 5,000 friends and I can't take any more. So if somebody wants to be a Facebook friend, there's a way to line up people trying to become friends. I wish I could bring everybody in.
Hi, welcome to Adelante. This is Adelante Recovery, and my name is Yvette Kuglin, and I'm part of the staff.
Adelante Recovery Center has helped people in dual diagnosis for 5 years. We accept most PPO insurances and provide luxury accommodations and 24-hour support. To speak with an admissions counselor, call 1-888-242-4450.
A lot of time we don't even know what's wrong with us, and sometimes we need to get away to figure that out. So if you want to go for a little retreat out in Corona Del Mar, which is a confidential location, we're here to help. So we're only a phone call away. Thank you.
Before we get started on our tour around Asia Pacific, I want to make sure Dr. Kilgour wanted to get this point out. We didn't have enough time in episode 1. Was to discuss that organ donations are still important, just not the illegal kind. So I'm going to have Dr. Kilgour explain that a little bit to us.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I very, very strongly agree with you. I'm all for people signing driver's licenses or whatever they can do. Voluntary donors are desperately needed, I believe, in just about every country on earth, including China, by the way. And so anyone who will voluntarily give an organ is, as far as I'm concerned, is terrific. What one country has done, they've said if you sign your card, which you'll be a donor, you'll get priority if you need an organ yourself. But you have to sign your card. I think it's 2 years before you get your organ, because they don't want people going out and signing the card the night before they need the transplant. So it's actually, I'm talking about the state of Israel. So they're, and in fact, frankly, the state of Israel is, as I mentioned in the break, is the leader in this. They've said it's illegal for anybody from Israel to buy a trafficked organ anywhere. And you don't even have to mention China, because China is the only country where that happens. And they've completely stopped Israeli nationals going to China for organs. And so we're trying to get other countries, including, of course, the U.S. And it'd be wonderful if the state of California would pass a law banning trafficked organs for residents of California, too.
That's a good point. I didn't even realize it wasn't illegal here. How
Now,
about
if you do it
in
outside the country? It is if you do it inside the country, inside the state. But if you go outside of California, or outside of U.S. or Canada, it's not an offense.
Interesting.
So, yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
How about the maple leaf?
Well, no, we're just as guilty as anybody. You could fly from Ottawa, say, or Toronto to China and have an organ and come back and get aftercare for your transplant done in China with the donor being somebody who was murdered, so you could have an organ. It's crazy. But I think a number of people are close, jurisdictions are close to blocking that, as Israel did several years ago.
I hope they really do. I hope they take a listen to this show and do that. That's really important. We cannot allow that kind of stuff going on. So let's go ahead and take our tour. We got some fun places to stop by. I wanted to check out Japan and see what they're up to, China, Vietnam, and maybe end our tour with North Korea. But before we give him any clout, we're going to first stop by Japan. Japan has been struggling for decades trying to get out of this recession. Abe is really pushing hard. He's doing a lot of monetary policies, but sometimes it seems he does one thing good, and then he tries to do something else to alleviate the tension that's caused by this over here, such as reducing interest rates, but then increasing taxes. And he's got this kind of a mixed thing going on. What's happening in Japan?
Well, I used to work, in fact, at the Bank of America. I worked with a wonderful woman from Japan called Kimi Narita. Unfortunately, she's dead now. She was my boss. She was an economist. And Dr. Narita used to point out things a long time ago about that she thought Japan was doing wrong. Namely, she couldn't afford to retire in Japan because the wages were so high and property was so high. At one point, Carlos, the Canadian embassy, which is on a fairly large lot, was worth $1 billion on the market. So real estate, as you know, had gone simply through the roof, and it's come down somewhat, maybe not enough, but it's come down. So as you were saying, somehow they have to get their economy growing again. They've been in a deflationary situation. Their economy's been in I gather, have been basically stalled now for 15 years. And I think I give Abe credit. He seems to be trying to get the economy working again. I don't know about you, but my wife and I both have Japanese cars, and we swear by them. We think I shouldn't say this, I guess, to someone in California, but Japanese cars are fantastic. And we have car manufacturers in Canada too, so I shouldn't be saying it for that reason too. But Japanese cars and many other experts are fabulous.
Let me ask you a couple of questions. And I know as a Secretary of State, you probably dealt with this. I'm sure you did. I think if I remember correctly, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I usually am. Abe was trying to pass something about reinstating the military.
Yeah, I think he's worried, and Japan for a long time was not basically allowed to have a military, and I think he does want to reinstate that, and I think that personally I would favor that. I think it's something he should do. He needs to have a strong military. We all need to have a strong military. Somebody said the other day, your defense spending in the United States is greater than the next 25 countries combined, and 24 of those countries are your allies in NATO. So you've been carrying the freight for us around the world, for the democratic world, for a long time, and it's time that Japan and Canada and all of us who believe in human dignity did more to help NATO or other treaties, whatever part of the world you're talking about. Japan has to do more. I'm all for Japan reunion.
And bringing that question to light now, it causes me to think about another thing, demographics. That's one of the biggest problems they say about Japan is the demographics. It's aging. They have a really big issue with immigration. They don't let very many people in. I know Abe was kind of trying to change that as well. What's going on there with the demographics?
Well, yeah, you're right. I think the population is actually dropping quite quickly and quite drastically. And if you don't have immigration, California, I guess, is a perfect example of how immigration allows you to keep your population young and dynamic and so on. Canada has a large amount of immigration. It's been a huge benefit to our country. We get people coming from all over the world. Canadians favor it. We're making up for a dropping fertility rate by having immigrants. And I don't know why the people in Japan that don't realize they need it as much as anybody. And I hope Abe succeeds in opening up Japan to immigration. As you said a minute ago, I don't believe they allow, or virtually no immigration is allowed into Japan.
I know The Economist had an article I remember reading about a few months ago, maybe about a year ago. I think the Japanese were actually paying Brazilians $40,000 to go back home.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I thought, wow, crazy. You're sending them away.
Yeah.
All right, we'll leave the land of the tiger and we're heading over to Vietnam. Vietnam obviously had a long history with America, not so pleasant history, but they seem to be really changing a lot over the last decade or so. What's going on in Vietnam?
Well, it's only, as a matter of fact, I was just at the annual meeting of the Vietnamese Federation of Canada, which was held in Ottawa about a week and a half ago. And no, human rights in Vietnam continue to be very, very bad. And I have a section on my website, by the way, on Vietnam, which documents that. The Vietnamese community in your country and Canada and Europe, wherever Vietnamese refugees, boat people, many of them, ended up, can tell you that human rights situation in Vietnam is terrible. But they're up to, I think it's 90 million people now, 80 or 90 million people in Vietnam.
Wow.
And I've actually been a number of times to Vietnam, and their manufacturing sector is doing very well. They're extremely hardworking, diligent people and skilled people. But we'd all like them to see move in the direction of having democratically elected leaders instead of party cronies, apparatchiks. I would hope that Vietnam would realize that it's got to have the rule of law. It's got to have democracy, in my view, democracy, and before the people and the human rights abuses will stop. So I'm most concerned about the human rights situation in Vietnam.
In Vietnam, are they really still communist?
Well, certainly I've been to the so-called National People's Congress in Hanoi, and to the government of Vietnam is still communist. It's one of half a dozen countries around the world that still calls itself communist, even though they do many things that are purely capitalistic, manufacturing being one of them.
Yeah, there seems to be a neo-communist movement coming around. In the last couple of decades, we saw with I hate to say it, but Russia seems to be playing the neo-communist card as well. China seems to be playing that card. Is this something that you see going on now?
Well, it's fact, funny you mentioned Russia because, by the way, Canada beat Russia last night for the World Junior Hockey Championships in 6-5 game. It was fabulous. I'm sure we didn't see it, but no, I think I've written quite a lot about Mr. Putin. I'm extremely concerned about what he's done in Crimea and Ukraine. The number of people who've been kicked out of their homes in eastern Ukraine and have been killed or wounded or have internally displaced is taking all of those statistics together. It's about a million people, but 400,000 have left Ukraine. So it's a very, very serious thing. But Mr. Putin doesn't seem to understand that we've spent, 80 years trying to build up a world where you don't go and invade your neighbor because you're stronger than he is. And I worry profoundly about Mr. Putin. And now that his economy, do you know that the Russian economy, Carlos, I read this the other day, with the fall in the price of gas, is now half the size of the economy of California.
Half the size of our economy?
Yeah, and they've got 143 million people, and you've got 38 or 36 or something. And so their economy is now half the size of your state economy. So one wishes, and a lot of that, of course, has been brought on by his invasion of Ukraine, and all the sanctions are there because of these kinds of things. And so a lot of these are self-inflicted wounds. I don't think there's much doubt that the king of Saudi Arabia is mad at Russia, and that's one of the reasons that he's kept up the production to hurt Russia.
Is that because of the Syria allegiance?
Partly, yes, I think so. Yeah, and so they have to understand that if Mr. Putin is going to be allowed to do these things as a former KGB officer, people are going to suffer. And I think I read that the average family income in Russia as of a year or so ago was about $15,000 equivalent. And with all the oil they've got, if there was any attempt to diversify the economy or share some of the money away from the oligarchs to the people of Russia, who are often in very difficult circumstances, people of Russia should be living a lot better than they are. And in my view, one of the main problems now, or not the main problem, is Vladimir Putin.
Let me ask you this question. I know some people brought it up that, hey, look, the eastern part of Ukraine, a lot of these people were Russian already. They wanted to be part of Russia because the economy wasn't doing very well in Ukraine. I think their GDP per capita was a couple grand. The people in Crimea mostly were Russian, so it wasn't really much of a takeover. It was more like, my hand's out here, help me out, I need help. Is that really a true statement?
It's almost exactly what Hitler did in the 30s with places like Czechoslovakia. He claimed that the German-speaking people in these countries were not being treated well enough, so he was going to invade. It's just a pure piece of sophistry. I actually was an election observer in 2004 in Luhansk, one of these cities in the east of Ukraine that we're having all the problems with. And if memory serves, the people in the Luhansk region, eastern Ukraine, voted not as solidly as the rest of Ukraine for independence, but it was certainly more than 50% voted for Ukraine to be an independent country in, 91? So, yeah, I think you a leader in country X can't say, I'm going to invade country Y because I think people who speak my language are not being treated well enough. If they don't like living in Crimea or in eastern Ukraine, they can move back to Russia. They obviously prefer to stay in Ukraine. Doesn't give Mr. Putin or Mr. Hitler the right to invade a country to protect his so-called nationals in those countries. It's just a invented piece of sophistry by a person that repudiates all the rules that we've set up after the Second World War to promote peace and harmony among countries of the world. So I don't buy that for 1 second. I hope your listeners don't either.
I hope so too. All right, we're leaving Russia. We've left Japan. We've taken off Hanoi. We're heading over to China. We talked a little bit about them in the last show, mostly focusing on organ pillaging, but I want to talk a little bit about China. It seems to be spinning its wheels right now in regards to their economy. They're not seeming to be getting any traction. They continue to try. Doesn't seem to be taking off. What's going on over there in China?
Well, what's going on in China is that a lot of Americans and Canadians and people in other parts of the world have been investing money in China, as you know, for since 1980, basically, when Deng Xiaoping took over from Mao. And if I'm not mistaken, Professor Greg Autry in California has pointed out with Peter Navarro that 50,000 manufacturing plants have closed in the United States, mostly for the jobs to move to China. And it's something like 20 million Americans in the last 20 years have lost their jobs in these manufacturing plants.
20 million.
Yeah, it's amazing. I can't tell you how many have lost their jobs in Canada, but it's a lot. It's a lot in Europe. It's a lot, probably in every country that we're dealing with. Now, even Walmart has said, as I'm sure you know, that they're going to start to produce goods again in the United States. They're talking about creating 1 million jobs in the United States. Well, isn't it a no-brainer that if you take, let me give you an example from Canada. I think it was Goodyear Tire closed their plant in Montreal about 4 years ago, put 850 people out of jobs, built the facility in China, and the transportation agency in Washington said the tires being made there were a safety hazard. Well, I mean, when are we going to say that the world economies that are doing well, South Korea, Germany, and so on, are the ones who know that manufacturing is vital to their success? And when is the United States and Canada and other countries going to get it into our heads again that we've got to start getting our manufacturing sector going? Even if it's advanced manufacturing, we have got to manufacture goods as well as, we can't all be flipping hamburgers at McDonald's. I wish your government and my government would get serious about this.
You'll think also we'll start heading more into manufacturing again, just because I know China's trying to switch from an economy that was export driven now to more of an internal consumptive economy. That seems to be influencing it a little bit because the price of the output cost, I think, is going up. It's getting almost more a parity with Mexico, last I heard. Do you think that'll have a big significance?
Well, I think my worry is that they've had such success out of the export economy that you mentioned that they'll want to continue that while talking about increasing consumer goods. And they do a lot of this. I've often said that nowhere in the world is talk cheaper than in Beijing, because they talk, whether it's organ pillaging or manufacturing, they talk a lot, but they basically like the model they've got. Is that you and I see our savings invested in China through mutual funds or something, or hedge funds, and they get the jobs, and we get the closed plants in California or in Canada. I often give the example of a group of Canadians who invested their life savings in a pharmaceutical plant near Beijing, $20 million. And within, I guess, 3 or 4 years, the plant had been closed. They lost every penny of their investment. And nobody ever talks about these examples, but there are a lot of examples like this. When you have a country that has no rule of law, that, as a friend of mine who practiced in Shanghai for 14 years points out, courts in China are a theater. They may have 3 people up there sitting, looking like they're reading the evidence, as he says, but the 3 judges up at the front aren't the ones who make the decision. The decision on the significant cases are made by a little group of judges in the basement who meet, say, on a Wednesday morning, say, this case is coming up on Friday, the decision will be this, the penalty will be that, and whatever is said in court makes no difference whatsoever. It's all decided by a little inside group of judges in the basement. I mean, how many Americans, Canadians know that? But this fellow who told me this, has written about it too, by the way, is Clive Ansley, is practiced in Shanghai for 14 years. And what finally convinced them, Carlos, to leave Shanghai was when an edict went out to all the judges in China, whether by email or whatever, it was that no foreigner was to win again in the courts of China. He said, that's it. I can't practice law in a country where if I'm representing a foreign client, he or she is not going to win in any court in China. But
that's insanity.
It's insanity. And why on earth do we let our retirement savings plans invest in our savings in China, in plants that are going to operate with no rule of law and with no respect for the environment, the natural environment, workers' safety, workers' health? It's just crazy. So I think it's all coming to a grinding halt.
We have a few minutes left here. So if you, I don't know if you can touch briefly on North Korea, and then we have a fastball question for you at the end as well, so you got to prepare yourself for that. What do you think is going on with North Korea? Is this all posturing? What is going on over there?
Well, incidentally, the only ally that North Korea has is none other than Beijing. I think that Kim Jong-un, the great leader, do they call him, has to be the worst head of state on the face of the earth. There may be someone else, but I don't know who it is. And imagine getting to the job because your grandfather was a dictator, and then your father had the job, and then he said, you at the age of, what, 23, can be the head of the country now. The people of North Korea, as everybody knows, are hardworking, they're industrious, and they are the most mistreated, misgoverned people, I would argue, on the face of the earth. And this man who hopefully he's going to do better, but I have to think that if there was an argument for having a democratically elected government, an accountable government, it has to be North Korea. He's just atrocious. Imagine blowing up your uncle. Where was it? His uncle and his aunts were all executed a couple of months ago. Oh, it's unimaginable.
What do you think we should do with him? What do you think? What can we do with him?
Well, China can certainly do something, and the government of China, who's been bolstering the economy for so long, has to somehow take it in hand and say, listen, great leader, you're not going to be allowed to do X, Y, and Z, and try to contain the guy. But they haven't done as much as they should.
Well, here comes the fastball question. Dr. Kilgour, are you ready?
Sure, I'll do my best.
Now, I have to admit, I'm not really familiar, but what's the symbol for Canada?
Some people say the beaver, some people say the maple leaf flag.
Okay, see, that's the issue here. We have Japan with the tiger, we got Russia with the bear, China with the dragon, American with the eagle. What would you give Canada for an animal?
Well, I like the beaver. The beaver, you may not know this, you don't have a lot of beavers down in your part of California, I don't think. They're very hardworking. They work 24/7. They're nice animals. They don't bite you. They don't hurt you. They get a lot done. They cut down a lot of trees, which maybe is not so good, but they're loyal. I think they're good animals. So all the other animals have been taken, so I'm happy with the beaver.
I'm sorry for the environmentalists out there, but the beaver is going to stick with Canada. Thank you so much, Dr. Kilgour. Once again, here are his books. Organ Harvesting, The Slaughter. You want to get them. You want to read them. They're great books. Don't miss out. If you want to go learn more about Dr. Kilgour and his work, you can go to www.david-kilgour.com. Thank you again for joining us. I hope you enjoy that tour around Asia. Remember, wherever there's psychology involved, even in the Asia Pacific, we are there. See you next time, everyone.